all across southern counties during the early hours. Behind it, clearer skies and colder air. So it will be a much colder night tonight compared to the one just gone. Fairly extensive frost, certainly in rural parts from the Midlands northwards, temperatures dipping below freezing, and even in some towns and cities. It does lead to a much brighter day tomorrow, though. Plenty of sunshine on offer. A bit of a breeze, perhaps, along some of these North Sea coasts, particularly Norfolk and in the far northwest. A bit more cloud maybe here, but generally plenty of blue sky, plenty of sunshine to come tomorrow. It will be a colder feeling day, certainly first thing, but in the afternoon, these temperatures 7 to 9 degrees, about average for the time of year with light winds. Won't feel too bad at all. The outlook is for much of the UK to remain fairly dry, certainly through the first half of next week, and staying colder than it is now, but still with temperatures around the February average.
I'm Michael Portillo. Join me on GB News on a Sunday morning for topical discussion, debate, arts and culture, and sometimes even some ethical dilemmas.
I don't always agree with you, Michael.
Michael Portillo, Sundays on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me.
So anyway.
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics, and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hi, Andrew Pierce here. Join me every Friday lunchtime for a proper no-nonsense debrief of the week's events. With special guests in the studio and the GB News team on the ground, I'll be getting you up to date with news, some intelligent discussion, and my own sharp take. The weekend starts here with me every Friday lunchtime on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my two comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
And right across the United Kingdom.
You can find us on Sky Channel 512.
Virgin Media Channel 604.
Freesat Channel 216.
Freeview Channel 236.
And YouView Channel 236.
You can also take us with you on DAB Plus Radio.
With the GB News app and at the website gbnews.uk.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello and welcome. I'm Alastair Stewart, and for the next 2 hours I'll be keeping you company here on TV and radio with the stories that matter across the country. We have plenty coming up, including the latest rise in interest rates. Will it curb inflation? Does it risk worsening the recession? I'll be digging deep into that with old friends and new. Plus, hints of progress on the Northern Ireland Protocol and the latest on the missing mum of two, Nicola Bulley. We are live at the scene. But first, let's bring you right up to date with all of the day's news. Here's Tatiana Sanchez.
Alastair, thank you. Good afternoon. It's 1 minute past 12. This is the latest from the GB newsroom. The family of missing mother of two, Nicola Bulley, have insisted there's no evidence whatsoever that she fell into the River Wyre. Nicola's sister is urging people to keep an open mind after officers investigating the disappearance say they believe she fell into the river whilst walking her dog. Miss Bulley vanished in Lancashire last Friday morning. The investigation is now focusing on a 10-minute window between 10 and 20 past 9 that's unaccounted for. Police say they're not treating her disappearance as suspicious, but as a tragic case of a missing person. Health leaders are calling on the government to show initiative to end ongoing strikes. The NHS Confederation says the health service will struggle to clear backlogs and improve emergency care unless action is taken. They warn if it doesn't improve, it will risk patients suffering even longer waiting times than they already do. Thousands of nurses and ambulance workers will walk out on Monday in what many are calling the biggest strike day the NHS has ever seen. Former medical director Dr. Andrew Vallance says the ball is in the government's court.
And of course they are worried about their salaries, but it's a feeling of lack of recognition of the work that they do. And then you see, and they look at other workers in the NHS who are desk-bound, who are working normal days, and they're working 8 or 12-hour shifts without breaks. And they say, why can't we get better recognition for what we do?
Meanwhile, health officials are encouraging 16 to 49-year-olds to get their autumn COVID booster before the NHS scales down its vaccine programme to focus on at-risk patients. The NHS says hundreds of thousands of appointments are available up until the 12th of February for those within that age bracket. After that date, the jabs will only be offered to those considered to be at risk of serious illness. COVID infections, though, in the UK have dropped for a fourth week in a row. At least one British sailor has been taken to hospital after problems with water supplies on board their warship. HMS Portland has returned to base as a precautionary measure. The Daily Telegraph newspaper reports the wrong chemicals were put into the vessel's fresh water system, but the error was flagged quickly to staff. The ship has returned to Portsmouth and the issue is being investigated. US officials say a second suspected Chinese spy balloon has been spotted moving over Latin America. It's after one was seen flying over sensitive military sites in the US yesterday. Earlier, the US Secretary of State Antony Blinken called off a visit to Beijing, calling the move a clear violation of US sovereignty and that he'd be prepared to resume his visit when conditions allow. China maintains it was in fact a civilian weather airship which had been blown off course. And the Princess of Wales has launched a photo-sharing campaign on social media to raise awareness of the importance of early years development. Kate led the campaign by posting a photograph of herself as a baby with her father. It's all part of her Shaping Us campaign, which has drawn support from the likes of rapper Professor Green and presenter Fern Cotton. She's hoping people will follow suit over the weekend. This is GB News. We'll bring you more news as it happens. Now it's back to Alastair, Stewart and friends.
Tatiana, thank you very much indeed. Now, this afternoon, we're going to be digging deep into the Bank of England's decision to raise interest rates to 4%, up from 3.5%, with old friends and new. And I hope with you, you've already been in touch, giving your views on it and your fears, be you individual consumers or be you business people. We'll be sharing some of those a little later on. Now, the bank's key job is the execution of what's called the government's mandate to squeeze inflation down to 2%. Despite clear signs that the rate of inflation is now slowing, it remains far above that target, and the containment of inflation is the government's top priority, as made crystal clear by both the Prime Minister in his New Year pledge speech and by the Chancellor of the Exchequer in his growth speech. Now, there's long been a really lively debate in the world of business and economics about whether the bank's mandate should also nod more to growth and not just to inflation. Historically, the government cut rates when they wanted to boost economic activity, and the historical low rates of interest that the bank is now raising had their roots, of course, in the financial crash of 2007-2008 and more recently in the pandemic. Now, famously, Gordon Brown ended all of that, judging that it is dangerous to mix the political and the economic, and he made the Bank of England independent in the matter of setting interest rates and doing battle with inflation. He told them, what I want you to do is what's right for the economy, not what might be necessarily right for me and my political party at any given time. It was really quite radical at the time, but that is what he and his key advisor, Ed Balls, decided was the right thing to do. Now, I don't think, like the Chancellor does, that lower inflation is the best tax cut. It simply means that whatever money you've got left after you've paid all of those taxes and bills and the rest of it goes a little bit further. But I know many people do feel that inflation is the absolute bête noire in our modern day economy, and therefore that's the government's view, and who am I to argue with it? Well, we'll have that discussion as the programme continues this afternoon. Now, the anti-inflationary essence of high interest rates is to curb demand in the economy and to reduce interest rates, and the price of money would be to increase all of that. When you put rates up, of course, the cost of borrowing, the creation of credit, and all that includes really goes rising. And that includes people's biggest debt, for most of them at any rate, if they have one, it is, of course, their mortgage. Now, an old explanation of inflation was that it was just too much money chasing too few goods in the economy and therefore forcing up the prices of those goods and services. And that's why those workers who are seeking big pay rises at the moment very often hear from the other side of the table, increase your productivity, and then we as employers may be able to find a little bit more money for you, i.e. higher pay, matching higher productivity and bigger output. If you create more value, or your extra pay will then not just force up prices, because if you don't, then it will do. But there is a sting in the tail. Earn more, of course, and nowadays you'll end up paying considerably more taxation. And that is a real problem for wage negotiators. Now, to make us live within our means rather than borrowing, then up goes the interest rate. And, of course, that tries to stop us also putting it on the plastic or going into overdraft. Even those who can get a boost from higher rates of interest, that's the savers, of course, they have to save first rather than spend in the economy and boost demand. So if there is a real threat out there, which I think there is, of a recession, then all of that is, in a sense, counterintuitive. The government also has to pay higher interest rates, intriguingly, not only servicing the eye-wateringly big long-term debt that it's built up over many, many years, but also the shorter day-to-day borrowing that they have to face day in, day out to simply balance the books. But it all means less demand in the economy. And in my view, even a shallow recession and stagnation in activity remain near certain nightmares, whatever the Bank of England had to say about it all the other day. So, as I said earlier on, I may be wrong, I may be right, you may agree with me, you may disagree with me, but I'd love to hear from you either way. So let's get into the discussion now, and what will the impact of it all be, and will it actually work? Of course, there are other real inflationary pressures out there. As the Governor of the Bank of England admitted, labour shortages, not enough people chasing jobs and therefore being able to push up the price that they charge for their labour, i.e. Their wages, and, of course, energy, which many feel is at the pounding heart of the cost of living crisis. I've said this several times now, but I'm going to say it again because I mean it. I do want to hear from you, so please, you can tweet me, or you can tweet at GB News, or you can email your views at gbviews@gbnews.uk, and we will share back the very best with you as we progress through the programme. So there you go. Now, before we discuss all of that and share those thoughts from you, and indeed from my guests in the studio and down the line, we are going to start with a story that was in the news bulletin just now, and it is a story that seems genuinely to have gripped the nation's attention. Police are still investigating the disappearance of Nicola Bulley, the mother of two, from Lancashire. Nicola was last seen next to the River Wyre in St Michael's on Wyre on a dog walk over a week ago. Now, Lancashire police believe that she fell into the river, and they say that its main working hypothesis is that there was no criminality involved. Right now, that is what they believed happened. Now, as Sir Arthur Conan Doyle wrote for Sherlock Holmes, when you have eliminated all which is impossible, then whatever remains, however improbable, must be the truth. A major search continues, however, for the 45-year-old missing dog. A missing dog's ball is also thought to be an important matter in all of this, and she may have gone into the river to try and retrieve said ball. Also, one exit from the walkway by the river apparently is not covered by CCTV. So it is an intriguing story, and it's an ongoing search. Absolutely tragic for her friends and families. Joining me now is our national reporter, Theo Chikomba, who's been collaring this story throughout and was there yesterday when the police gave their update, and there he is in Lancashire for us live now. Theo, it was a remarkable briefing from the police in the sense there was more about what hadn't happened than what had happened.
That's right. The briefing yesterday was comprehensive. We heard a lot about some of the work the police they're doing. As you can probably hear, there's a helicopter right above me. It's been circling this area and looking over the River Wyre, specifically where that bench is, where we understand her phone was found. And they've been working extensively over the last couple of days to establish what happened to Nicola last week, Friday. There have been many agencies involved. Today, again, police officers have been walking alongside the riverbank just to look to see if they can find anything substantial which may help their investigation. Of course, family and friends have also been out and about in the village holding placards which have got a picture of her and also some details saying 101. And if you have any details or dashcam footage particularly, please do get in touch. They are, of course, the Lancashire police saying people shouldn't speculate as it may cause distress on the family. In terms of what happened last week, they're saying there's nothing out of the ordinary of Nicola's actions during that week, and they're saying that investigations are going to be continuing throughout the weekend.
GBNews national reporter Theo Chikomba live for us there in Lancashire with the latest developments as that search continues. And both the family and the police have made it clear that if you have seen her or think that you know anything about what may or may not have happened, then please dial 101 and tell the police as soon as you can. Thank you very much indeed. We'll be going back to Theo a little later on the programme, and we'll certainly go straight back to him if there are any further developments. Now, let me take you back to our other big story of the day, and I spoke a little about it before we heard from Theo, and that is the big rise in interest rates that came from the Bank of England in pursuit of their mandate to defeat inflation. My first guest sitting here in the studio with me, I'm delighted to say, is an old friend. That's Letis Bromowski, who is a political commentator. But I didn't know, as I said to you when you came in and sat down, formerly with the Institute of Economic Affairs. So this is very much your bag as well, as speaking on the politics of it. When you heard that that was the decision, it had been widely flagged that it was likely to be another increase, but the scale of the increase, were you surprised? Were you shocked?
I'm going to say that no, I wasn't particularly shocked. As you say, this had been sort of forecast for a while that we would have to have this steep increase, particularly because for so many months last year, they refused to increase those interest rates. It's been a particularly interesting week in terms of forecasting, I'll say, and when the IMF came out earlier this week with their forecasting results that the UK would have the lowest growth in the G7, I think there's a particularly dangerous aura around some of the IMF's forecasting, in the sense that it becomes a rather self-fulfilling prophecy sometimes. The more you read the news and you hear things like, oh, you know, we're going down this dark tunnel, everything's going to go wrong, and the more people hear that, the less likely they're going to be to think, oh, I'll book that holiday this summer, or maybe I'll just wait till next year now when prices might be better, the forecast might be better, or even just I won't buy that new coat, the new pair of shoes. It's also important to note that the IMF has been wrong before on some of their forecasting. Namely, just last year in July, they were predicting that the UK would only grow by 3.2%. Yeah. They then changed that again in October to 3.6%, and then just this week they've come out and said actually it's 4.1%. So that's a 1% change over the last 6 months.
The Bank of England have been wrong as well, and they chop and change. But rather than the scale of the rise, I think the two things that surprised me most were that I thought the direction of travel for inflation was downward, and it was beginning to show some signs of progress. And then when Andrew Bailey, the governor of the Bank of England, said, I think there will still be a recession, but I think it will be shorter-lived and it may well be shallower. And if there's one thing, as you said there, with your brilliant examples of deferred spending and reduced demand, that's going to deepen the recession and make it last longer, it is exactly that. If we don't have money to spend on goods and services, then economic activity will slow. That, for me, is the nightmare.
Yeah, exactly. And you want to have a little bit more in your back pocket. And really, it comes back to the age-old thing that seems like a stuck record of we do need to lower taxes so people do feel like they have a little bit more in their back pocket. In terms of interest rates, one of the issues that we're seeing for many people is that this is impacting their mortgages. So if your mortgage is going up so much, all those smaller things that the government is doing to help with your energy bills, help with the cost of living, it sort of just cancels that out. And it means that people aren't being helped in any way at all. Particularly for younger people trying to get on the property ladder at the moment, we've had about a decade of very strictly controlled mortgage lending. And actually, the Bank of England came out and said in December they had only given out 35,000 mortgages. This was down 23% from November. So we are seeing it being even more tightly controlled at the moment. And I think that getting on the property ladder is one prime example of where we can really expand the economy. People will be investing in that house, investing not only on the interior, you might not be buying all of your furniture from IKEA, but maybe from the local businesses, but also investing in the community. If you decide to set up shop there, it changes a lot.
Is there also an issue here, and we've talked about this before when you've been kind enough to join me on the programme, about the risk of intergenerational tension, in the sense that these rates is going to make it even more difficult for people in your generation to enjoy what my generation enjoyed for a long time. And that was relatively easy access to mortgage funding, to buy our own property, to get on to that ladder, as it were. It is clearly going to be much more difficult for your generation going forward. Are you fearful about the social consequences of that?
I'm not so fearful about the social consequences of it. I think, on the whole, across generations, mortgage increases or just trying to get on the property ladder is going to be an issue for everyone. I do fully understand, though, the frustration that younger generations feel, that we are constantly being cast out or the second ones to be looked at when it comes around to budgets and things like that. It's very difficult. I mean, it was only last December that it was 6% of 18 to 25-year-olds said they would vote Conservative. Sure. That's an entire wipeout of a generation that will be voting Conservative. Conservatives really need to change that around. But I'm not seeing much from any of the political parties in the way of really going to support these younger generations. So, and there is the tensions of 2022, which is a discourse I hope we can leave behind, which was saying that the young generations can't get on.
We have to leave it there. But
OK.
Do come back and we'll talk about that again, because I think it is a rich and lively subject, not only for oldies like me, but for people like you in the younger generations. Leslie Bromowski, great to see you again. Thank you very, very much indeed. Now, my next guest is David Payton, who is Professor of Industrial Economics at Nottingham Business School, and indeed used to be a government advisor at Her Majesty's Revenue and Customs, the tax people. Was my kind of amateur explanation at the top on inflation and how interest rates are supposed to work helpful, or am I missing something here?
No, I think you gave a good summary. I think the big driver, though, of course, of our recent inflation have been the two huge factors of the lockdowns and the amount of money government spent and people's restrictions on what they could spend, followed by the supply chain crisis across the world, but also linked to that then, of course, a big increase in energy prices, which were partly linked to the the war in Ukraine. Now, there's good and bad news. I think what we're seeing at the moment is that most commentators think inflation has probably peaked. Energy prices have certainly gone down quite a bit, and so that gives some potential hope for future interest rises being perhaps lower than might have been expected. So there is hope in the future. We've also seen in the UK, despite the IMF predictions, growth has been slightly better than expected, or at least not as negative as expected. So people thought we were definitely going to be in recession over the past 6 months. It's going to be touch and go, I think, when the latest figures come out later in the month, whether we're technically in recession. And as the Bank of England says, if we are, probably not as deep as was expected. So that's sort of, the positive news. Of course, there are much deeper structural problems in the economy in terms of the long-run growth prospects, which do need to be addressed, though.
What does the FTSE Financial Times Stock Exchange Index tell us? Lots of very thoughtful pieces in the newspapers this morning about it flirting with new highs, having hit new highs. I mean, investors don't muck about with these things. Clearly, they are slightly more optimistic, perhaps, than I am, or you've implied that you are. But for me, the lack of growth, the taking demand out of the economy, as Lettice was just saying, made me, when I listened to Andrew Bailey say, look, I think there probably will be a recession, but I think it may be shorter-lived and it may be shallower. I found that literally incredible.
Well, the FTSE is a signal, you're right, and it is reaching record highs, and that's an indication that investors have some confidence in the long run of the economy. And we see that in the jobs market as well, which in the States and in the UK and across Europe has held up really, really well. We saw sort of record job market figures in the States come out yesterday, and certainly in the UK that's held up well. So that does raise a prospect that that we may be technically in a recession, but certainly not as bad as people were expecting a few months ago. The issue is, how do we move back to longer term growth? And that's where there's more structural problems. And I think one of the things the government has got to get to grips with is, in the short run, now's probably not the time to be increasing taxes. You've got certain sectors of industry, the hospitality sector, the retail sector, which are really on the edge and are looking at things like VAT. Business rates is a big issue for those sectors. Also, perhaps corporation tax.
Sure.
Now is probably not the time in the short run to be looking to increase taxes, but in the long run,
interesting that Liz Truss and now Boris Johnson haven't given up on that strategy of saying that now is the time to cut taxes rather than increase the interest rates, because they are seriously concerned about the lack of growth in the economy. Do you believe now is the time to change the mandate for the Bank of England to not only be the defeat of inflation, but also the pursuit of growth?
No, I don't think that's the role of the Bank of England. I think that's up to the government. We have had a big increase in interest rates, but actually in the context of much higher inflation, real interest rates are not necessarily higher. And of course, it can be very difficult for people on mortgages, and mortgage rates have gone up. But it does mean that we're seeing some decreases in house prices, which in the long run may help people get on the bottom of the ladder. We're also just starting to see fixed-term mortgage rates starting to go down. So there's obviously an expectation that perhaps interest rates maybe haven't quite peaked, but are not far off the peak. So I think, that's the Bank of England's role. It's the government's role to think about growth, the right tax rate, And really, the fundamental issue is energy rates. We've seen that's been a big impact on inflation. We all, of course, want to move to further improvements in the environment and cleaner energy. But
David,
I think there needs to be a
how
bit more of
prescient
a
of you. We're
balance
going to be
in that
talking
area.
about mortgages right up next. But great to meet you, and thank you very much indeed for finding time to talk to us here on GB News. David Payton, there, Professor of Industrial Economics at Nottingham Business School and a former government advisor at HMRC. And as he was just saying, mortgages, of course, are an important area in all of this. And there's a two-page spread in the Telegraph this morning, the headline of which is basically it's time to rethink pretty well everything on the mortgage front. And I'm delighted to be joined once again here on the programme by Raab, who's a senior mortgage manager at the John Charcoal organisation, one of John Charcoal's many spokespeople and an expert and authority on all of this. Is this a necessary and brutal tool for the Bank of England to apply at this stage of the economic activity, or do you think they've overdone it?
Alastair, no, well, the increase in bank rate to 4% was widely expected, so that was all factored into the market. The really important point to note from the Bank of England statement was what it said about what's likely to happen in future. So whereas prior to Thursday, people generally were expecting the bank rate to peak at 4.25 or 4.5. It now looks very unlikely we're going to go to 4.5. And in my view, from the statement, quite possible 4% will be the peak. So the combination of the peak being lower, another comment in the forecast suggesting that rates are going to start to fall quicker and inflation will fall quicker, means that the gilt edge market saw some really big drops in yields on Thursday. So basically, the cost of 5-year money for lenders is now a quarter point less than it was before Thursday's meeting. And that's going to have a knock-on impact on mortgage rates. So we're going to have what may, to some people, seem the rather odd situation that bank rate's gone up. Therefore, if you have a tracker or discount mortgage, your rate's going to go up. But fixed rates are coming down. And I think by next week, we'll see some lenders coming out with 5-year fixed rates under 4%.
So is that when I quoted the Telegraph when they said it's now time to switch your mortgage, you seem to be on a slightly longer time scale than perhaps just immediately pick it up. And I know you'd be the first to say, always talk to an expert in the field, don't always do just what the newspaper columnists suggest you ought to do. Am I wrong to think that you sound a little more optimistic about the medium and longer term than perhaps many out there are?
Well, certainly as far as the mortgage and housing markets are concerned, that's right. The downward trend in interest rates on fixed rate mortgages has got further to go. So it's a little bit premature to actually switch at this point. I would wait and see where markets settle. Everybody's circumstances are different. For some people, it may make sense to stay on a tracker rate for a bit longer, even though the rates are higher. Because they may want to wait and see what happens. But a lot of people do really value the knowledge of what is probably, even after energy price rises, still their biggest monthly mortgage payment. So locking into a fixed rate gives people that certainty. But everybody's circumstances are different. Some people will be planning to move in the near future, etc. So, as you said, it really is important to talk to your independent mortgage advisor to discuss your individual circumstances. But if you are looking for fixed, I think there looks less value in a 2-year fix on the basis that tracker rates will be similar to 2-year fixes. So it does look more likely that if you're going to fix, think about a 5-year fix, but wait a few weeks until the market settles down.
Ray, always a pleasure to talk to you. Such wisdom and such balance. So it may be the time to change, but it certainly, as Ray just said, it's the time to have a really deep and profound think about what you're doing in terms of your housing arrangements, particularly if you're in the mortgage market. That was Raab, who is one of the senior advisors at John Charcoal and a good friend of mine. And it's always a pleasure to have him on the programme. And you're watching and listening to Alastair, Stewart and Friends, with lots more coming up on the programme this afternoon. A week, of course, is a long time in politics. We will have all of the latest with our political reporter next. including the continuing rows over that man and allegations of his behaviour, bullying claims against Dominic Raab, Deputy Prime Minister. That is next, right after this break.
This year on GB News, we've got brand new members in the family.
Join us. Across the entire United Kingdom, we cover the issues that matter to you.
GB News will always stay honest, balanced and fair. We want to hear whatever is on your mind.
And we don't talk down to you.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you. Britain's watching.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
Do you not believe in prison?
I don't believe in prison.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We are GB News, and we'd like to say thank you to each and every one of you for bringing us your conversations, for helping our great nation find its voice. We are here for you on radio, television, and online, across England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland.
It's not the BBC, you actually get your facts right.
We are proud to be GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
Good afternoon, it's 12:33. I'm Tatiana Sanchez in the GB newsroom. The family of missing mother of two, Nicola Bulley, have insisted there's no evidence whatsoever that she fell into the River Wyre. It's after police say they believe she fell into the river whilst walking her dog. Nicola disappeared last Friday in Lancashire. The investigation is now focusing on a 10-minute window that's unaccounted for. Officers say they're not treating her disappearance as suspicious, but as a tragic case of a missing person. Health leaders are calling on the government to show initiative to end the recent strikes. The NHS Confederation says the health service will struggle to clear backlogs and improve emergency care unless action is taken. Thousands of nurses and ambulance workers are walking out on Monday in what many are calling the biggest strike day the NHS has ever seen. At least one British sailor has been taken to hospital after problems with water supplies on board their warship. HMS Portland has returned to base as a precautionary measure. The Daily Telegraph newspaper reports the wrong chemicals were put into the vessel's fresh water system, but the error was flagged quickly by staff. The ship has returned to Portsmouth and the issue is being investigated. A US jury has found Tesla's CEO, Elon Musk, and the company were not liable for misleading investors. That's following a tweet from Mr. Musk about the firm's finances. The company's boss tweeted in 2018 that he'd funding secured to take the electric car firm private. Investors say they were misled by the tweet and subsequently claimed billions in damages. But the jury came back with a unanimous verdict after only 2 hours of deliberations. TV, online and DAB Plus radio. This is GB News. Now it's back to Alastair, Stewart and friends.
Tatiana, thank you very much indeed. We've made it a regular feature on this programme to try and bring you up to date with the latest shifts and turns in the world of politics, and it never ends, does it? And I'm delighted to say that joining us once again is Catherine Forster, GB News political correspondent. Is it Dominic Raab who's in trouble, or is it Rishi Sunak who's in trouble over these allegations of bullying? I mean, there are some pretty impressive names in the witness box.
Yes, I mean, this is an ongoing nightmare for Rishi Sunak, isn't it? Because, of course, Dominic Raab was a close ally, a big supporter of him during the leadership campaign. When he cut Nadeem Zahawi adrift last week, Nadeem Zahawi and he had never been particularly close. Nadeem Zahawi had supported Boris Johnson, supported Liz Truss. But more and more questions about what the Prime Minister knew and when about these allegations. Yes. Now,
and may I bump in just to share with folk at home, because we were talking about it earlier on. It's important to stress that some of these witnesses, in inverted commas, are not political enemies or from other political parties or different sections of the Conservative Party. These are very senior civil servants.
Yes, senior civil servants and civil servants from all the departments that Dominic Raab has worked in. And today in the Times, an unnamed cabinet minister who is a supporter of Dominic Raab has actually said he doesn't think he's a bully, but says that he definitely feels he has anger management issues and that he thinks he could benefit from anger management training, and that he'd seen a red mist descending on him. And that's from a supporter. So it's difficult to see how this ends well for Dominic Raab, who's, of course, insisting that he has done absolutely nothing wrong. But, of course, it's sucking all the oxygen out of Rishi Sunak's trying to get positive messages across about what the government is doing. And a lot of it is being lost because this ongoing row about standards and sleaze. And, of course, Rishi Sunak promised to turn over a new leaf.
You mentioned that unnamed source with his or her four penneth. A named source is David Frost writing a column today. And it's a direct dig at Rishi Sunak for being too reliant upon experts, advisors and senior advisors, including quite specifically Simon Case, the Cabinet Secretary.
Yes, Simon Case's position, I would say, is looking in some doubt, although the Prime Minister's spokesman on Friday said absolutely the Prime Minister has complete confidence in him. But certainly it looks like the Cabinet Secretary, Simon Case, was told months before Dominic Raab was appointed by Rishi Sunak that there were these serious allegations against him. And it looks like potentially he didn't pass those on to the Prime Minister. We can't be certain. And also, there's another story today about a whistleblower from the Foreign Office in The Guardian who's now suing the government because of the way she was treated. And she is blaming she's putting a lot at Simon Case's door too, basically saying that the culture of the civil service has become about protecting ministers and making them look good rather than doing what they're supposed to be doing, which is helping the government to get their policies through. So lots of criticisms of Simon Case coming from different sources. And but yeah, for now, he has support of the PM.
Looking desperately for myself and on behalf of our lovely viewers and listeners, a few stories dotted around the papers this morning about some possible positive news on the strike front, with nurses in Wales and maybe something fresh in terms of the rail industry. Are you hearing that? Because I mean, if there's anything that's going to come to the government's rescue, it is industrial peace.
Yes, and the strikes are the other big nightmare, aren't they, for the government at the moment, because the government have been holding firm. It does sound, certainly from the RMT, that we might be finally about to get to a breakthrough, although we have been here before. And certainly the fact that the nurses' strikes in Wales at least have been suspended, but at the moment it's wave upon wave of strikes and difficult to see how it ends. But of course, some good news. The FTSE, as you've been talking about, is at an all-time high. They're looking forward. They're seeing the recession, if it comes, when it comes, shorter, shallower. Inflation is becoming down. Interest rates have probably peaked. So there is good news.
That's why we're doing it as well.
Coming,
Absolutely.
But it's
Catherine, always a pleasure, and thank you very much indeed for breaking into your busy working weekend to spend some of that time with us. And if your phone pings and you get anything else, just tell the team and come on back in. Always good to see you. Catherine Forster there, GB News political correspondent, here on Alastair, Stewart and Friends, with plenty more still to come this afternoon, including British gas are under fire, not least from Grant Shapps, the Energy Secretary. Brutal in a piece that he's written for the Times newspaper for forcibly installing repayment meters in the homes of vulnerable people, with the regulator now asking companies to suspend the practice. Well, we'll be discussing the impact of all of that next, so do stay tuned. And don't forget, keep those emails and tweets coming in.
He's the king of breakfast TV, and he's back.
Eamon Holmes, back on the TV
Surprised
with me this morning.
Even remember my name.
I know, it's been 4 months. You have holy water by your bed?
Oh, yes.
Oh, good.
Already to bless.
Oh, Eamon. Oh.
Why do you not believe anything I say?
Eamon Holmes back on GB News Breakfast at 6 a.m.
Here on GB News Live, we'll be keeping you in the picture, finding out what's happening across the country and finding out why it matters to you. We'll have the facts fast with our team of reporters and specialist correspondents. Wherever it's happening, we'll be there from 12 noon on TV, radio and online. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michael Portillo. Join me on GB News on a Sunday morning for topical discussion, debate, arts and culture, and sometimes even ethical dilemmas.
I don't always agree with you, Michael.
Michael Portillo, Sundays on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
You're an inspiration to us all.
Click that bit up.
Well, you are.
That's my ringtone. My political ambitions those days are gone, I can tell you. She's only teasing. Go on. He's probably going to want to lay down now. I'll give him 2 minutes to have one. Let's respectfully disagree. That's what we like on Jubes and Kerr. Come and join us. GB News, the People's Channel.
Michelle Dewberry, weekday evenings at 6 o'clock.
Monday to Thursday on GB News, it's Bev Turner Today from 10 a.m. We're going to be here for you, our GB News family, to keep you up to date, but also make you smile.
The guy went from puberty to adultery.
And I can't wait to bring a few of my own opinions.
I have no time for cultural totalitarianism.
We'll engage in passionate, but always polite debate, with your thoughts and opinions at the centre of it all. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. You're watching and listening to Alastair, Stewart and Friends here on GB News TV and radio, and thank you very much indeed for so doing. And you have answered my plea to get in touch on our big topic of the day, and that is that big rise in interest rates. Here we have the first one, which is from Jasper, who says, FTSE 100 index at a record high. Oh, it's all doom and gloom. Eye-watering profits which should be taxed for a fairer distribution into the UK economy. Now, Gareth joins the conversation and says the banks rarely increase the interest rates for savers, as opposed to borrowers, where the rate is increased within minutes. Of course, they go rocketing up, don't they, just wherever it's possible. And Kay says, Liz Truss and Kwasi Kwarteng were spot on. Rishi and Jeremy Hunt are useless, and we didn't vote for either of them anyway. Uh-oh! There's a lot of coverage to say that Liz Truss has not given up on that budget that was vilified by so many, and Boris Johnson's now joined the argument as well. So whichever side of it you're on, do keep your views coming in, and we will share some more a little later on. And we've had some great conversations already about this subject. If you missed them, do subscribe to our YouTube channel. We are, of course, at GB News, and you can catch all of the previous programmes and indeed previous programmes there. Now, the boss of British Gas has said that he is horrified that many of us thought it was simply an outrage even before him making his little observation, to learn that debt collectors have been breaking into vulnerable people's homes to fit repayment meters for fear of those folk simply not being able to pay those astronomically high energy costs. Well, that's a reasonable issue about debt, but there's also a reasonable issue about private property and your rights. apparently one magistrate was issuing writs to allow this to go ahead without really asking any questions at all, and that magistrate has now resigned. Many that were targeted, it came clear over the last couple of days, were vulnerable people, including those who are disabled. Now, this morning, as I said earlier on in the programme, the Energy Secretary Grant Shapps is brutal in the Times newspaper, calling this scandalous and shameful. But what will the government do? Well, he's asked Ofgem to stop it, and indeed they have responded, and other energy companies are saying no, they've accepted now that it is wrong and that they will put a stop to it. Joining me now to talk about the impact of all of this, I'm delighted to say, is an old friend, Amo Raju, who's the CEO of Disability Direct. I said vulnerable people, but I gather from your team as well that that included some people who weren't only economically vulnerable, as it were, but vulnerable in the sense of disability. You had people getting in touch with you saying, this is happening to us right now.
It's not on, is it, Alastair? It's borderline burglary. And these kind of things have psychological effects which take a very long time for the mainstream population to get over. But if you have already got challenges due to the effects of disability, the social and economical effects of disability, it takes a lot longer for someone to get over this. And I am aware of people who have said this has happened to them. Nobody in my direct area, but I have heard of people who have said this has happened to them, and it's scandalous is the right word, and it's very rare that I would share the views of Grant Shapps, but I think he's right. Something needs to be done to make sure this never happens again. I'd like to know what processes were followed for someone to arrive at the decision that I'm going to break into someone's property.
Good to see. We've got a problem, I think, with the line, and we're not hearing clearly enough. So I'm going to draw a line under there. But I and certainly I hope the people at home got the gist of what you were saying there. We're going to get you back on if we may, so don't go away before we go off air a little later on. So you keep in touch with the team, and they'll be giving you an email or a call very, very shortly. Now, total change in topic. The Princess of Wales has launched a social media photo sharing campaign to raise awareness of the importance of early years. You'll remember, I think it was last weekend, that we talked about the Broad campaign and discussed just how important it was, not only amongst the charity world and educators, that to get those early years right was important, but how important it was for those charities as well that she herself was on board, which she clearly has. She led the campaign this morning herself by posting this photograph of herself as a baby with her dad, and it is part of her Shaping Us campaign, which has drawn support from the likes of celebrities, including Roman Kemp and Fern Cotton. Well, joining me now to discuss this further is former royal correspondent at the Sun newspaper, Charles Ray, and a very good friend of mine from the old days as industrial correspondent. Charles, when she became William's wife, and before formally becoming the, as it were, the Princess of Wales, she made the hospice movement one of her chosen charities. And this is broadening it out. This is getting into early years, as it were, formation of a children's outlook and what have you. It's quite radical stuff because it does trickle a little bit into the world of politics.
Yes, it does. And it is a campaign that is a natural for her, in effect, because she wants to get to the heart of the matter. And there is nothing more at the heart of the matter than the the development of our children, particularly those at the vulnerable years that she is targeting, from 0 to 5 years old. And this Shaping Up campaign is to try to raise awareness. Now, there are some people who are criticising it already because where is the money going to come from? But realistically, you don't need money for this campaign. You just need people to become more aware of how important it is that our very young children are nurtured right at the start through their parents or their guardians, through to nursery school and early learning.
Indeed. So the other thing, your sound dipped there just a moment, Charles, so let me pick it up and run with a similar ball, or the other side of that coin, as it were. And we've talked about this many times in the past, that the royal family are normally quite reticent with what appears on social media, but for her to post a picture of her as a tiny wee thing with her dad and to encourage others to do it as well, do you sense that in William and Catherine's case, they've looked at the moans and groans of Harry and Meghan, they've decided, no, if you do it properly, it can be positive, and that's the road we're now going to go down?
I think you're absolutely right that they are using social media. I mean, there's so much on social media, Alastair, as you well know, that it's evil. It's like a Wild West. But this campaign is for good, and you've already got people like Harry Kane, the England captain, showing a picture of him when he's under 5, and he's already put his right foot forward as a way of showing that he's got a great right foot. You've also got Jamie Oliver, and it's not just celebrities, though, that she wants. She wants just, you and me, people, the viewers, the listeners, to join in this campaign and show pictures of when they were much younger with their parents or in happy circumstances. And what could be better than to flood Twitter with fantastic pictures of young children like this with their parents, as the one that Catherine has shown this morning?
Can I also ask you... some people are fascinated by it and other people go, oh, God, no. But the intervention of the Archbishop of Canterbury in trying to bridge a peace for the House of Windsor and the newspapers, not least your old stomping ground, are full of suggestions that the deal has now been done and that indeed Harry and Meghan will be attending the coronation of Charles III. Do you buy into that?
Well, the problem with this is that there is no definitive version on this. There is, yes, people are saying that they are coming. I firmly believe that they will be invited. Now, whether or not they come is the big $64,000 question. But whatever happens, Alastair, whether they come or they don't come, they're still going to be the cause célèbre, and it's going to take the shine off the coronation. There is no, in my view, there is no question about that, because they are becoming, a social talking point for everybody in the country, and it's like a scab that you've got, and you start to pick at it, and it gets worse and worse and worse. Now, whatever happens, whether they come or they stay away, they'll still be forefront of that coronation, which I think is a great, great pity.
Charles, thanks very much indeed. Always good to talk to you. And Charles Ray there, former industrial correspondent and court correspondent of the Sun newspaper. Now, we're going back to Amiraju, the CEO of Disability Direct. Whatever the sound problem was, we have sorted out, I'm delighted to say. You were halfway through describing your own shock and surprise at this. My question really is whether there's a suggestion out there, and I think there probably is, that rather wanting the Energy Secretary to get cross about it, which is a good thing, but to do something about it, and a suggestion that if you are a vulnerable person, be it because of age or disability, whatever, that this simply should not happen. They should in some way be protected from such an invasion or such an intervention which risks cutting off their supply of essentials. What's your view on that?
I think that'd be a sensible approach, but technically, most of these utility companies should already have on their register of customers as to whether this person is a vulnerable adult or a disabled person or a person with higher level of needs. And so, you'd think there's some algorithm in their system to prevent those people on that list from being targeted in this way. And as I say, that's what really surprises me, that a blanket approach has just been applied to...
I only interrupt to underline the significance of what you've just said. So, as it were, ignorance is no defence whatsoever, because those vulnerabilities and those challenges would have been listed in the customer assessment. So if they were clutching at straws, there are none to clutch.
I'd agree with that totally. And you say, I'm a disabled person, and I've listed with my utility suppliers that I have needs, as do most disabled people will have listed that there are needs to be taken into consideration. And my concern here, as I say, a blanket approach has been applied without any common sense. And I think, that there's just no excuse. As I said earlier, this is in the same category as burglary to some extent, and the long-term effect on disabled people with this. I don't know how long it's going to take for people to get over this. And if I read that there was children with on the autistic spectrum who were affected by this kind of activity by these debt collectors. What's it going to do to them? How do parents explain to them what's just happened and why it's happened? It's beyond my logic thinking.
Well, as we both said at the very top, it was genuinely shocking for very, very many people. But let's finish. We've got about a minute left, and that is a more positive story about access for disabled people and vulnerable people. I gather that more money is being given to local councils for more accessible loos. I know from many disabled people that it remains an absolute bugbear. I mean, talking about absolute rights, why has this suddenly come to the fore? And why can there possibly be so many places that do not have accessible public provision for disabled people who just need to spend a penny?
I think it's really positive news, but just let's put this into perspective. The campaign for toilets that are the changing places standard is nearly 20 years old. And go to the loo on an equal basis is a basic human right, and I think we really are behind here. But excellent news. All I would say to local authorities is, when you're making your cuts, do not make cuts in the maintenance budgets of these loos as well, because these can easily turn into very large broom cupboards.
Message received. Message received loud and clear. And I'm grateful. Thanks for coming back to us and sharing those additional thoughts as well. And I do apologise that we had a little technical problem a little earlier on. That was Dr. Amo Raju, the Chief Executive Officer of Disability Direct. And you are watching and listening to Alastair, Stewart and Friends here on GBNews TV and Radio, with more to come on the programme this afternoon. We will be discussing the progress that apparently is being made on the Northern Ireland Protocol. But first, a quick break.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me. So anyway.
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics, and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hi, Andrew Pierce here. Join me every Friday lunchtime for a proper no-nonsense debrief of the week's events. With special guests in the studio and the GB News team on the ground, I'll be getting you up to date with news, some intelligent discussion and my own sharp take. The weekend starts here with me every Friday lunchtime on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
And right across the United Kingdom.
You can find us on Sky Channel 512,
Virgin Media Channel 604,
Freesat Channel 216,
Freeview Channel 236,
and YouView Channel 236.
You can also take us with you on DAB Plus Radio,
with the GB News app and at the website gbnews.uk.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello and welcome if you've just joined us. I'm Alastair Stewart and we are into the last hour of our programme. Thank you very much indeed if you've been with us from the top. I will be keeping company on TV and radio for the remainder of this afternoon with plenty more still to come up, including, as we mark the 3rd anniversary of Brexit, what's afoot with progress on the Northern Ireland Protocol. Plus, today is the beginning of the Six Nations tournament in rugby, and we have a special guest to help us discuss that within this hour as well. But first, let's bring you right up to date with all of the day's news. Here once again is Tatiana Sanchez.
Alastair, thank you. It's 1 minute past 1. This is the latest from the GB newsroom. The family of missing mother of 2, Nicola Bulley, have insisted there's no evidence whatsoever that she fell into the River Wyre. Nicola's sister is urging people to keep an open mind after officers investigating the disappearance say they believe she fell into the river whilst walking her dog. Ms Bulley vanished in Lancashire last Friday morning. The investigation is now focusing on a 10-minute window between 10 and 20 past 9 that's unaccounted for. Police say they're not treating her disappearance as suspicious, but as a tragic case of a missing person. Health leaders are calling on the government to show initiative to end ongoing strikes. The NHS Confederation says the health service will struggle to clear backlogs and improve emergency care unless action is taken. They warn if it doesn't improve, it will risk patients suffering even longer waiting times than they already do. Thousands of nurses and ambulance workers are walking out on Monday in what many are calling the biggest strike day the NHS has ever seen. Former medical director Dr Andrew Vallance says the ball is in the government's court.
I mean, of course they are worried about their salaries, but it's a feeling of lack of recognition of the work that they do. And then you see, and they look at other workers in the NHS who are desk-bound, who are working normal days, and they're working 8 or 12-hour shifts without breaks. And they say, why can't we get better recognition for what we do?
Meanwhile, health officials are encouraging 16 to 49-year-olds to get their autumn COVID booster before the NHS scales down its vaccine programme to focus on at-risk patients. The NHS says hundreds of thousands of appointments are available up until the 12th of February for those within that age bracket. After this date, the jabs will only be offered to those considered to be at risk of serious illness. COVID infections in the UK have dropped, though, for a 4th week in a row. The bodies of 2 British aid volunteers who died during a humanitarian evacuation have been returned to Ukrainian authorities. The families of Chris Parry and Andrew Bagshaw say the pair were attempting to rescue an elderly woman from the eastern town of Solidar in early January. The bodies were returned as part of a prisoner swap between Russia and Ukraine, involving nearly 200 people on both sides. US officials say a second suspected Chinese spy balloon has been spotted moving over Latin America. It's after one was seen flying over sensitive military sites in the United States yesterday. Earlier, the US Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, called off a visit to Beijing, calling the move a clear violation of US sovereignty and that he'd be prepared to resume his visit when conditions allow. China maintains it was in fact a civilian weather airship which had blown off course. Staying in the US, and a US jury has found Tesla's CEO, Elon Musk, and the company were not liable for misleading investors following a tweet from Mr. Musk about the firm's finances. The company's boss tweeted in 2018 that he had funding secured to take the electric car firm private. Investors say they were misled by the tweet and subsequently claimed billions in damages. But the jury came back with a unanimous verdict after only 2 hours of deliberations. At least one British sailor has been taken to hospital after problems with water supplies on board their warship. HMS Portland has returned to base as a precautionary measure. The Daily Telegraph newspaper reports the wrong chemicals were put into the vessel's fresh water system, but the error was flagged quickly by staff. The ship has returned to Portsmouth and the issue is being investigated. And the Princess of Wales has launched a photo-sharing campaign on social media to raise awareness of the importance of early years development. Kate led the campaign by posting a photograph of herself as a baby with her father. It's all part of her Shaping Us campaign, which has drawn support from the likes of rapper Professor Green and presenter Fern Cotton. She's hoping people will follow suit over the weekend. This is GB News. We'll bring you more news as it happens. Now it's back to Alastair.
Tatiana, thank you very much indeed. Hopes rose last week that little progress may be underway on the Northern Ireland post-Brexit protocol. With the European Union, stagnation has harmed the economy in Northern Ireland as elsewhere and cost Northern Ireland its power-sharing executive. But even die-hard unionists were, it seemed to me, a little more optimistic. In the Independent newspaper today, Tory Brexiteers are urging the Prime Minister to allow a vote on any compromise agreement struck with the European Union and the folk in Brussels to end the row over the Northern Ireland Protocol. So, is something afoot? What's it all about? Delighted to be joined now to try and get to the bottom of it all by two old friends. Matthew Robinson first, the chairman of the Northern Ireland Conservatives. Is this just a bit of overspin, or is there something really quite important going on at the moment, Matthew?
Great to be back with you, Alastair. I mean, I think it's clear the UK government has really turbocharged its urgency to get a deal over the line. I think we're close. I'm optimistic we're close. There has been some speculation in the media, that a deal has perhaps been reached. Now, both sides have said there's still some technical issues that still need to be worked out. But I mean, compromise is the name of the game here. There will have to be, at the end of the day, a compromise between both sides. I would say some of the technical solutions that the UK government has been advocating for from the start, like a green lane for goods coming from GB into Northern Ireland, even potentially digitalizing some customs checks, were long suggested years ago. I mean, I can remember as early back when I was working in the European Parliament in 2017, there was a report commissioned to the European Parliament. A trade expert called Lars Carlson suggested just these technical solutions at the time, and they were laughed out of the room by many. But these are the very same sensible technical solutions to the protocol that are seriously being looked at now, and I'm confident should be included in any potential compromise deal. But I think we need to get away from the pandering, the grandstanding, and the politics of it. We need to find a workable solution that benefits businesses in Northern Ireland that have been absolutely hammered by the COVID pandemic, by the energy crisis, hardworking taxpayers in Northern Ireland. We need a deal here. We need to attract inward investment into Northern Ireland. And the longer this uncertainty goes on, I do worry about its long-term impacts on the Northern Irish economy.
The reassurance that Brussels seemed to need most of all was the very technical infrastructure that you described there that would be in place and would be available, because clearly for them the single market is utterly crucial to the raison d'etre of the European Union. They're not going to blink on that any more than you or the unionist parties, the other unionist parties, are going to blink on the union. So are you increasingly confident that that's the pill that's been swallowed, i.e. if we rely on trustworthiness, honour, integrity, we can do this and both sides keep what they need?
I think the UK government has always recognised the fact that the EU would try and protect the European single market. I mean, that's a fair and reasonable thing to expect. But cutting through that, let's be really clear about this. Goods coming, especially agricultural goods, coming from GB into Northern Ireland, sandwiches coming in from GB into Northern Ireland into supermarkets pose absolutely zero threat to the European single market. I mean, the UK government's Green Lane proposal should have been accepted long ago. Yes, there are some very legitimate constitutional concerns amongst unionism in Northern Ireland with regards to ECJ jurisdiction. There is some speculation that maybe there's a compromise afoot there whereby only Northern Irish courts can effectively refer decisions to the ECJ in that regard. I'd be very curious to see the detail on that if indeed there is a compromise afoot. But one cannot also escape the political reality, and the reality, in fairness to those friends and colleagues in the Democratic Unionist Party, they were very clear when they went into the Assembly election about what their red lines were and what their mandate was. And they, while I have some disagreements with them over their approach to the protocol, they did receive a legitimate democratic mandate from a huge chunk of the unionist community in Northern Ireland. So that also, both sides of the community need to be respected. That's an integral part of the Good Friday Agreement. So whatever deal the UK government secures, and I hope there's a bit of room on the DUP side, but it's going to have to satisfy some of the concerns of unionism. This, by the way, Alastair, has not helped the fact that we're looking potentially at another Assembly election this year, where the DUP are under a lot of pressure on their rightward flank from the TUV and Jim Alastair, and council elections as well. So I think the DUP will be balancing their political fortunes as well in the upcoming round of elections in Northern Ireland with regards to what type of deal they end up accepting or not accepting. And the fate of the Northern Ireland Assembly is, of course, in the balance for that.
Matthew, final question, and it's party on party. Has the new Northern Ireland Secretary impressed you?
Yeah, Chris Heaton, I'd say both Chris Heaton-Harris and the Minister of State, Steve Baker, are totally on top of their brief. I think they have, they brought a renewed sense of optimism to Anglo-Irish relations that's most welcome. I mean, there was a lot of good work done on the ground with the likes of Brandon Lewis, who was there before, but I think both Chris Heaton-Harris and Steve Baker are a fantastic team. And I have a good rapport, I think, established with their counterparts in the Irish government and ambassadors across Europe as well. So I think these things are welcome. Ultimately, we all live on the same island, regardless of one's constitutional position. I'm a unionist, but I have Irish blood. It's in the interests of both unionism and nationalism, and none of the above, that we have good, healthy Anglo-Irish relations. The UK government gets that. And certainly the team in the Northern Ireland office gets that as well.
Matthew, it genuinely always a pleasure, which is why I asked you back to chat to you, and no point scoring and no silly points being made there. But I'm genuinely thrilled, as I'm sure many are, that you too sense that there may be something underway that could bring good news for Northern Ireland and for all of our friends there. particularly given that making another welcome return as well is also Roger Pollen, who is the head of the Federation of Small Businesses in Northern Ireland. Matthew just said that your sector has been absolutely hammered. The economy has been absolutely hammered by the delay over this protocol and the interruption of trade, whether it's exporting goods or importing raw materials. How bad has it been?
Well, I think to be fair, and good to see you again, Alastair. To be fair, I think he said it had been hammered by COVID first, and then by energy costs, and then by the other things laid on top of that. So the challenge has been, therefore, to understand exactly what is causing the problems that business have been facing. So we did a huge exercise to map our membership, and we really found that in respect of the protocol, it broke down into 5 cohorts. The first cohort is the people that the protocol is working well for. The second is the one that it doesn't really affect, so things like services. The third is one where somebody else is taking the pain, so people just don't see the issues that they're having to deal with. So, for example, a small business getting supplies from a local wholesaler, the wholesaler is taking the pain of bringing stuff in. The small business doesn't necessarily see that. The fourth group is a tricky one. That are the businesses that are protected by grace periods, and there are lots of grace periods in place which are a bit like sticking plasters on a bandage. And we don't know whether the wound is healing or festering. And then the fifth group is the ones that are affected really badly. So we've seen, I suppose, over decades here that the whole Good Friday Agreement was about protecting minorities. So if there's a significant minority of businesses that are being badly affected by the protocol, that should be of a concern to everybody.
Do you go along with Matthew's view that the new Secretary of State and ministerial colleagues are, as it were, a breath of fresh air because they get exactly that? They are listening to people like you as well as people like Matthew, and that the infrastructure issues can be sorted out, and that there is a recognition that it's not just a common problem across the whole piece. There are specific groups, as you've just so eloquently described, who need particular support and particular help, and there are others, frankly, who can just get on with it.
Well, I think to take the two ministers you talk about, the Secretary of State recently facilitated and I think played a very large role behind the scenes in ensuring that the Foreign Secretary came over to Northern Ireland to meet with businesses, and he came out to meet with some FSB members and really to understand the problems that they're facing so as he knew exactly what it was that he needed to achieve in his discussions with the EU. The Minister of State, Steve Baker, has also been really on the front foot from the moment of his appointment, came out to meet with FSB members in our offices, went out to see some of the frictionless solutions that Matthew was alluding to, that some members of ours have been developing, which is where you can understand what is coming across from GB into Northern Ireland without ever needing to look in the back of the lorry, simply by clever use of data. So yes, both of them in their own ways have got very engaged in the process here. And I think that's why we're seeing the optimism that we are, that there's a solution on the horizon.
We do believe on this programme of giving praise where praise is due. And I just merely point out that the Federation of Small Businesses in Northern Ireland, as well as the Conservative Party in Northern Ireland, have made very similar comments about the quality and calibre of people who are there trying to represent affairs in Northern Ireland within the central government. How worried are you, as the voice of small businesses in Northern Ireland and a businessman yourself, our big topic of conversation today, and that's the big rise in interest rates? Because not only individuals having to pay more for mortgages or bank loans or what have you, of course, at the heart of that are people running small businesses who may need to borrow to refurbish a shop or buy another bit of kit to make them more productive and more competitive. How worried are you about that big jump in interest rates?
There is a big concern about it because to a certain extent, businesses look around and see that the economy is slowing anyway because of the price of things is going up so much. So the rise of interest rates is also intended to achieve the same thing that rising prices are causing, which is that people have less money to go around. And it is a concern because businesses have had to come through 2.5 years of very difficult times because of the pandemic and so on. So there's a lot of need to reinvest in those businesses to grow them. There's opportunity to do that. There's the whole green agenda where there is great opportunity for businesses to spring up there. But if they're going to have good customers, those customers need to have access to cash. And And at the moment, that cash is getting more expensive. So it's an unwelcome factor. We understand why it's in there. We don't necessarily agree with the analysis that it'll achieve what it's intended to achieve, because so much of the inflation we're seeing is caused by international pressures rather than domestic overspending. But hopefully we're seeing the increase in rates slowing at least, and then maybe start to see some reversals later on in the year.
Roger, brilliant on the protocol and brilliant on interest rates there as well. Thank you very much indeed for finding time for us this weekend. That's Roger Pullen, the head of the Federation of Small Businesses in Northern Ireland, encapsulating beautifully what it does mean to be a small business person contemplating making borrowings to improve, enhance and develop and expand your business at the sharp end there. So great to have him and indeed Matthew with us to discuss that as well. I'm also very pleased to meet a new friend, not been on the programme before, but very welcome nevertheless, and that's Glenn Wheeler, who's a restaurateur based in Northern Ireland, who also featured on the BBC's Great British Menu programme. You're very welcome, and thank you very much indeed for finding time for us. We were just hearing there that there are various categories of people who've really been hammered by the delay in sorting out the protocol, and others who, frankly, can kind of just shrug and get on with their lives as well. Where do you put yourself, Glenn?
Good evening, or good afternoon, Alastair. It's getting so hard, I suppose, as a young entrepreneur. Myself and my wife run the restaurant. The margins are getting tighter and tighter. Obviously, price of electric, price of produce, everything is going through the roof, and there's no support or there's no real guidance going forward where this is going to take us. There will be casualties, I think, as far as restaurants are concerned, the next 3 or 4 months, as the bank will get tighter and people aren't spending anymore. People aren't coming out maybe as often as they would, and yes, it's very, very worrying going forward.
Yeah, perfect answer, and obviously into exports are not a problem for you because you run a restaurant, and that is by definition a small business. But has the flow of raw materials and products that you and the rest of your kitchen team prepare and turn into wonderful meals, has that been affected by the hiccup over the protocol? Or is it mainly that point that you make there at the end, that it's folk having enough money in their back pockets and their wallets to be able to come out and enjoy a terrific meal?
Yeah, well, to be honest, we're very lucky in Northern Ireland and Ireland as a whole. We have such great produce, so I don't import too much, and that end hasn't really affected me, honestly. I can see a lot larger organisations obviously affecting, but not really. It's mainly the disposable income. It's just not there anymore, and people are being really careful of what they're spending. Like, obviously, my menu prices have to go up with the price of produce, but I can only do that so far. Until I have no one coming in the door. So we have to work it very, very well. But it just doesn't seem to be any. If there was support out there or some guidance going forward, it'd give me more confidence and we can plan ahead. But at the minute, we're almost taking baby steps because we don't know what's around the corner. We just came out of a pandemic, and we're still blindfolded as far as I'm concerned.
I invite you to chip in on our big discussion, and Roger did as well, very helpfully. And that is, I describe you as a small business person, someone set up the brilliant restaurant we could see behind. How troubled are you by inflation versus the prospect of high interest rates further reducing demand at your wonderful restaurant? Are you worried about growth? Are you worried about recession?
Absolutely. We are based where my restaurant is now and where I live. We're literally 8 or 10 mile away from the border in the south. So we have a great opportunity in Northern Ireland this summer if we capitalise on it. There's going to be lots of tourism coming over. I know the Republic of Ireland, speaking to friends and that work in the south, hotels are wedged. Prices in hotels went through the roof in the last 3 or 4 months. So we can capitalise on this, but if we don't get this protocol sorted, the protocol itself is probably way over my head, to be honest with you, but the effect the protocol has, obviously it has disabled our government. So we've no active government. So we need to get this sorted, ironed out, so we can really push and have a good summer. I'm confident we can have a good summer if we get this under control. But I have no confidence in our local government at the minute. It's been disabled now, I think, 12 months yesterday. So it's almost embarrassing at this stage that we can't find an agreement and move on. We've come so far, as Northern Ireland has, in the last 20, 30, 40 years. I just think we need to keep going. I feel almost like our government is like an anchor holding us back and progressing. So once we get all this thrashed out and ironed out, I think we can be confident that we can do well this year.
Yeah. Glenn, been great to meet you, and thank you for joining the lineup. And
thank you very much.
Genuinely, all of us wish you well on being on the right side of optimism and the wrong side of pessimism. Let's hope that the worm does turn and that the business goes from strength to strength. But thanks for sharing those frontline thoughts with us there. That's Glenn Wheeler, restaurateur in Northern Ireland. And we've plenty more still to come in what remains of the programme this afternoon here on Alastair, Stewart and Friends. After the break, it's been 10 years since the body of Richard III was discovered beneath a car park in Leicester. So what have we learned about the infamous Plantagenet king? Or was he the first of many to be cancelled, not least by William Shakespeare? We'll be going live to Leicester to get the latest on that and new developments on Richard III. But before all of that, let's bring you right up to date with the weekend weather.
Hello, very good day to you. It is going to be quite cloudy with some drizzly rain around, but it's in the northwest where there'll be some more persistent rain for a time. At the moment, if we take a look at the bigger picture, we are in a warm sector in between the warm front towards the east and this cold front towards the northwest, and that warm sector is bringing those cloudy conditions I mentioned earlier. This front, as it gradually pushes its way southeastwards, is bringing some rain. You can see towards lunchtime we're going to have some wet weather across parts of western Scotland and into Northern Ireland too. Elsewhere across the bulk of the UK, yes, it's cloudy, but largely dry with just a few spots of drizzly rain around. Some brightness breaking through the cloud, but this will be quite limited this afternoon. Temperatures are a little bit on the mild side for the time of year, many places getting into double figures, highs perhaps reaching 12, maybe even 13 Celsius towards the south and southeast. Turning colder from the northwest though behind this cold front, with some showers feeding in across parts of Scotland, and these are likely to have a bit of a wintry element to them, particularly over the higher ground. Notice as the front pushes its way southwards, it doesn't bring a huge amount of rain to southern parts, with clearer skies then following in behind. Under these clear skies, temperatures are going to take quite a drop tonight, particularly across the north and west. That's where we're likely to see quite a widespread frost, a touch of frost possible further south first thing on Sunday morning. Through Sunday itself though, a fine day, high pressure firmly in control, so there'll be lots of calm, settled weather around and plenty of sunshine too, albeit the sunshine could be a little bit hazy at times because of some high level cloud. Temperatures on Sunday are going to be down a couple of degrees compared to what we're going to see today, but with the sunshine, it'll probably feel quite pleasant at times. As we go through the end of the day on Sunday, across England and Wales, we're going to hold on to those clear skies. So as a result, Sunday night's again going to be quite chilly with a touch of frost. Further north, though, across parts of Scotland and Northern Ireland, some thickening cloud and also some strengthening winds. And we could see some spells of rain, drizzly at times. As we go through the rest of the week, though, it's going to be a bit more changeable towards the north, staying fine towards the south, but some chilly, perhaps frosty and foggy nights.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. for Gloria Meets. In exclusive interviews, I'll be finding out who our politicians really are and what they really think.
It's something that you would never want anyone to suffer.
I didn't know what channels there were. I didn't think I'd be believed.
I must have weighed about 7 stone and I'm 5'8".
My instincts was to sort of cover this up. I mean, clearly that was a mistake.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
This year on GB News, we've got brand new members in the family.
Join us. Across the entire United Kingdom, we cover the issues that matter to you. GB News will always stay honest, balanced and fair. We want to hear whatever is on your mind.
And we don't talk down to you.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you. Britain's watching.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel. Join me, Nana Akue, Saturday and Sunday afternoons on GB News. Expect fiery debate and passionate discussion as me and my panel tackle some of the biggest topics hitting the headlines. It's a place for everyone's opinion. No one gets cancelled, but no one gets an easy ride.
Oh, she's on it today!
Be ready for conversations that are fierce, frank, and of course, fun. Every Saturday and Sunday afternoon from 4 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel.
We are GB News, right across the nation. You can get us on television, on radio, on digital. We're absolutely everywhere.
Amazing! You see, amazing!
You remind me of me in the European Parliament. But here's the most important bit. We are not part of the mainstream establishment. We think and speak just like you do. We are the People's Channel.
Magnificent. That's really, really thoughtful.
Come and join us on GB News, the People's News Channel.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. for Gloria Meets. In exclusive interviews, I'll be finding out who our politicians really are and what they really think.
It's something that you would never want anyone to suffer.
I didn't know what channels there were. B, I didn't think I'd be believed.
I must have weighed about 7 stone and I'm 5'8".
My instincts was to sort of cover this up. I mean, clearly that was a mistake.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, it's 1:30. I'm Tatiana Sanchez in the GB newsroom. The family of missing mother of 2, Nicola Bulley, have insisted there's no evidence whatsoever that she fell into the River Wyre. It's after officers investigating the disappearance say they believe she fell into the river whilst walking her dog. Ms Bulley vanished in Lancashire last Friday morning. The investigation is focusing on a 10-minute window between 10 and 20 past 9 that's unaccounted for. Police say they're not treating her disappearance as suspicious, but as a tragic case of a missing person. Nicola's friend Heather says it's all too much for the family.
As a friend of Nikki, I am struggling to see how we can take a theory as a conclusion. Nikki, we need evidence to know where Nikki is, and as far as I'm aware, they have not found any evidence. So Paul and Nick's parents and sister last night, they're heartbroken. They are living a living hell. And on top of that, they have all the speculation that comes out to deal with. It's too much. It's not fair.
Health leaders are calling on the government to show initiative to end the recent strikes. The NHS Confederation says the health service will struggle to clear backlogs and improve emergency care unless action is taken. Thousands of nurses and ambulance workers are walking out on Monday in what many are calling the biggest strike day the NHS has ever seen. The bodies of 2 British aid volunteers who died during a humanitarian evacuation have been returned to Ukrainian authorities. The families of Chris Parry and Andrew Bagshaw say the pair were attempting to rescue an elderly woman from the eastern town of Soledar in early January. The bodies were returned as part of a prisoner swap between Russia and Ukraine, involving nearly 200 people on both sides. TV, online and DAB+ radio. This is GB News. Now it's over to Alastair.
Tatiana, thank you very much indeed. Today marks 10 years since researchers officially confirmed that remains discovered beneath a car park in Leicester were indeed those of King Richard III, in a story that has captured the attentions of the world's press. A dedicated team of academics found the grave, which had been lost for nearly 500 years. Our East Midlands reporter, Will Hollis, has more on the latest developments surrounding a story that still intrigues so many.
For nearly 500 years, King Richard III was lost, his royal resting place quite unremarkable. But a decade on, the story of his discovery remains just as astonishing.
This is the courtyard, the playground of the Victorian school that the King Richard III Visitor Centre's in, and through this door is the car park where Richard III was found.
After extensive research, writer Philippa Langley fixed upon a part of this car park, even describing a sensation in the exact place Richard was buried. A team of archaeologists from the University of Leicester started digging. Within just a few hours, he'd been found, with curved spine and DNA for proof. Phil Hackett is from the Richard III Visitors Centre.
There was an R marked on the tarmac, and she said she had a feeling that that's where he was, which, you know, obviously sounds insane, and yet she was proven right. And then on top of that, the DNA sequencing is a speciality of the University of Leicester, and the living relatives were the last ones in the line because they haven't had children. It really is the most incredible archaeological detective story ever told.
The space has been given special protection by Historic England, and the Visitors Centre is built right on the spot where Richard was found. Richard III was the last Plantagenet king. His family ruled England for 300 years, until he died at the Battle of Bosworth in 1485. In the centuries since, he's been a villain, mainly because of Tudor propaganda and Shakespeare. But many historians argue in his favour. Richard Smith is from the King Richard Society.
We know that his body wasn't chucked in the river by an angry mob. That was a silly story. They sort of make people pause a little bit in sort of just repeating other silly stories about him.
Molly studied history at uni. She volunteers helping to share Richard's story.
Keeping that enjoyment in history alive, keeping the relevance that history is alive is really important.
Richard now rests at Leicester Cathedral. It's closed for renovations, but tourists still come in their thousands. Peter is Leicester's elected mayor.
Many tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of visitors brought here as a result of this. And of course, that's a major boost for our economy as well. And we've seen, for example, an increase 60% in the number of hotel rooms in the city.
Jane is from Sheffield. She's visiting family, but couldn't miss the chance to come here.
I mean, I can remember when they said, you know, they're going to dig, try and find him, and you think, well, needle in a haystack, don't you? And the fact that they actually found it and then helped to prove, obviously, that it was him, well, it's amazing.
In a fresh turn for the tale, the remaining car park is up for auction. It's expected to reach £4 million. The story that comes with it is quite priceless. Will Hollis, GB News in Leicester.
Fascinating story continues there in Leicester, and a brilliant piece of forensic research there by the historians and by the rest of them. I'm delighted to say that our East Midlands reporter, Will Hollis, who did that report for us, joins us live now. And there he is. What's the agenda? You spoke to a whole range of people there who gave their witness, their testimony, their particular interest. But what is it that they still want to know that is missing from the real, factual story of Richard Plantagenet?
Yes, well, Leicester can be described as a historic city. It can now be described as a tourist hub because, of course, of Leicester Cathedral, where King Richard III was interred in 2015, and, of course, because the King Richard III Visitor Centre. And I'm joined now by Phil, who's the general manager. We saw you in the little film, but also, how are we feeling at this point, getting to 10 years? It doesn't seem like it's been that long.
Oh, the decade's absolutely flown by. I mean, we're celebrating the 10th anniversary of both the discovery and the reinterment of Richard III. And this announcement, which is when the University of Leicester confirmed with 99.9% accuracy that it definitely was Richard III, was a real moment to celebrate. It still sends shivers, up my spine when I think about it.
That story, it's a story that's gone on for 500 years. He's often been painted in different lights. What do we know about King Richard III because of this discovery, and what are we still trying to figure out?
Well, actually, I mean, he was only king for 2 and a bit years, and so there's very little evidence that survives from his time as king. And so actually, it's one of those moments where people can really do more research and we can find more about Richard III. There's an entire society, as you know, the Richard III Society, that funded the original dig, and they're good friends of ours here, obviously, at the King Richard III Visitor Centre. So it is a story that just keeps going.
And that story is partly been formed by Shakespeare. Are we finding that maybe some of the Shakespearean tale of what Richard III was actually like is maybe not quite fact and it's a little bit more fiction?
Oh, of course. I mean, Shakespeare's play was for entertainment. It was of its time. And of course, plays had to be authorised by the royal family at the time, which were the Tudors, and they obviously didn't want to say anything very positive about the Plantagenets.
10 years, King Richard III Society, how are you, the King Richard III Visitor Centre, how are you celebrating in there at this period?
Well, as I say, we've been celebrating all year, and we're going to carry on for the next 2 and a bit years, all the way through to the interment in 2025. So we've got a whole load of activities coming up. We do a number of talks and sessions on site, but really we've just been celebrating the 10th anniversary by introducing a £10 annual pass. So everybody can come and visit the King Richard III Centre for £10 to celebrate the 10th anniversary.
It really is a remarkable story, and it's one that I'm sure you never get tired of telling. We've been telling that story again this week because the car park is now up for sale, it's up for auction.
Indeed, yes.
£4.1 million. How do you think that might affect what goes on here at the Visitor Centre?
Oh, well, we're looking forward to find out who our neighbours are going to be. I mean, it's a story, I mean, it is remarkable, and every time you tell it, there's another element of it that is just as remarkable as any other. But, you know, we've got a new exhibition on display at the moment that tells you about the history of the Greyfriars Precinct, which is why Richard was lost. So we now know more about that than ever before because of the archaeology. And we're planning some new exhibitions in the coming years that are going to show you how Leicester was in the medieval period during Richard's time.
Phil, thank you so much for talking to us.
Thank you.
£4.1 million for a car park, but it's a story, Alastair, that is actually quite priceless.
Indeed, and a story that keeps giving. Just don't mention Princes in the Tower up in Leicester. They would get very grumpy if you do about that, but at least they resolved the bit about Richard Crookback from the DNA and indeed from the bones. I really enjoyed that, Will. Thanks for doing that, and thank you through you to your brilliant guests and experts there, shedding more light on the final remains of Richard III and his resting place. You are watching and listening to Alastair, Stewart and Friends here on GB News TV and radio, and thank you very much indeed for so doing. We've plenty more still to come this afternoon, including thousands of schools are set to close this month, of course, and indeed many already have done, as teachers continue to strike over pay. But what rights do parents have if they need to take time off work to take care of their children who are not being taken care of in schools? We'll be discussing that next, but first, a quick break.
This year on GB News, we've got brand new members in the family.
Join us. Across the entire United Kingdom, we cover the issues that matter to you. GB News will always stay honest, balanced and fair. We want to hear whatever is on your mind.
And we don't talk down to you.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you. Britain's watching.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates. Do you not believe in prisons?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We are GB News, and we'd like to say thank you to each and every one of you for bringing us your conversations, for helping our great nation find its voice. We are here for you on radio, television, and online, across England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland.
It's not the BBC, you actually get your facts right.
We are proud to be GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. for Gloria Meets. In exclusive interviews, I'll be finding out who our politicians really are and what they really think.
It's something that you would never want anyone to suffer.
I didn't know what channels there were. I didn't think I'd be believed.
I must have weighed about 7 stone and I'm 5'8".
My instincts was to sort of cover this up. I mean, clearly that was a mistake.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. You're watching and listening to Alastair, Stewart and friends here, indeed, on GB News. Now, as we know, the strikes have been going on in most of our public sectors, and health service perhaps top of the list for some, and of course on the railways as well. But also teachers in Scotland and in England and Wales have become one of the most recent to walk out in their thousands over pay and conditions. Now, with many schools closing due to that industrial action, it isn't only the children and their education that is being hit. What is the knock-on effect for parents who are having to fork out now for childcare to cover the missing days, and what are their rights, if indeed there are any rights at all? Obviously, school is not there as an alternative to childcare, but if you working mums and dads kind of take it for granted that when they drop their kids off, they'll be there, they'll be fine, and they'll be safe. But are there rights within that context? That's what we want to explore next. And joining me to do that, I'm delighted to say, is Russell Holland, barrister and partner at PHP Law, LLP. Russell has expertise in the fields of education and employment. Do mums and dads have any rights?
Yes, they do, Alastair. So employees are entitled to take reasonable time off to care for dependents. So that's not just children, that could be other elderly relatives. But of course, today we're talking about strikes specifically. So if you find out that your school is not going to be open that morning and you can't go to work, you should contact your employer straight away and explain that you have a childcare emergency and say that you are requesting time off. That time off does not have to be paid, but you are entitled to it. But some employers do offer it as paid leave. Similarly, you might even ask to take it as holiday, but I think time off for dependents would be the best thing to request here.
How fascinating. So not unlike sick leave in that sense, that you get a sick note to explain why you yourself as mum and dad are in breach of contract, in inverted commas, with your employer. But what about if you need to get hold of somebody to look after the children because you've explained yourself to your employer and you are within your rights, as you've just made that crystal clear, but you still need somebody to look after the little darlings because there simply isn't anybody else to do that. Do mums and dads have any rights in that territory?
Well, so I'm assuming here that the parent would want to stay home and look after the child themselves. In that scenario, they would not need to go into work. They could stay home and look after their child. I mean, this is assuming the employer says yes, which I think they would. And I think really the thing to emphasise, I would really recommend employers make sure that they understand this. You can just Google time off for dependents, that will take you to the government website. I'd recommend employers make sure they have a policy in place on this. Some employers do offer 1 or 2 days paid leave. It does depend on the policy, and to contact all staff and just let them know what their expectations are. Similarly, employees, if you think you may be in difficulty, tell your employer very early on, because it may be that you could agree to work from home. This is a type of thing where I really hope employers and employees could have a sensible, pragmatic conversation and not have to involve lawyers.
Very wise and very sage advice there. But it's interesting in a week where we've been looking about what the best and the brightest want from a potential employer in terms of workplace facilities and time off and work coaches and so on. This is an area where people who are looking for important positions may well go to their employer and say, what are your arrangements in terms of childcare? Should I need help and should I need support in that area?
Yeah, I think, of course, we know there's some labour shortages in certain areas. So I think it is incumbent upon employers to get themselves the best possible offering for employees. But it starts by just getting that understanding of what the basic rights are, and then working from there. And it's going to vary. Small businesses, of course, may be in less stronger position to make the same offering as a big business, but those basic rights and entitlements are there. But fundamentally, something like this, I think, is all about communication. The strike dates are known, so employers should contact employees just to let them know this is the policy. If you can make alternative arrangements, please do come and talk to us. There's a problem. As I say, I really hope that 9 times out of 10 that can be solved. You can also request parental leave, but that has to be taken in a block of 1 week, and you have to give 21 days notice and been employed for a year. You could also ask a holiday. So the scenario here, there is law specifically for emergencies. As I mentioned, it doesn't just apply to children, it applies to dependents. So if you have any kind of genuine emergency, you can make that request for your employer. But it's best the employer sets this out or very clearly in a policy, so that way everybody knows and no one's taken by surprise. Of course, with a strike, we do know the exact date, but the head teacher may not know who's coming in till that morning, which is what makes it very difficult to do the planning.
All tricky, candid conversations, always best right across the whole spectrum, and avoid having to go to law unless you absolutely...
definitely recommend that if you can.
Russell, great to see you. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. Russell Holland there, barrister and partner at PHP Law LLP, with his advice and guidance. Yes, you do have rights, but equally your employer has the right to know what your problems are and what you face as new challenges as a direct result of industrial action. Now, a total change of tack. Over 90,000 patriotic rugby fans are expected to head into Cardiff today ahead of the opening match of the Six Nations, Wales versus Ireland. England also take on Scotland. That, of course, is known as the Calcutta Cup. And Italy take to the pitch for their match against France, that have had such a remarkable run in recent times. Now, the on-field action could be clouded perhaps a little by a week that has seen allegations of sexism and misogyny and a scandal indeed surround the Welsh Rugby Union and indeed even the Tom Jones classic, Delilah, being banned from being sung because of the chorus here. But with the return of the Gatland, as I'm told he is well known, can Wales do it and beat Ireland, which, if you look at the newspapers today, most people seem to be agreed that Ireland is the one to beat in this tournament. Joining me now, I'm delighted to say, and to talk about all of that, is and all of the Six Nations, is former Welsh international rugby player Richard Hubbard, and there he is, currently playing for the Dragons. It seems to me that this is the most vexed Six Nations tournament for quite some time, is it not? I mean, most fans seem to think that rugby just gets on with it, and it's football that has so many hissy fits and the rest of it. But rugby seems to be surrounded in rather a lot of it at the moment. Do you agree?
Yeah, it's a little bit of going on at the moment. In rugby in Wales in general is always under some sort of drama going on in the background. This one seems to be very potent and a nasty little situation for the WRU.
It's also very much about managers, isn't it, with changes and returns of people like Gatland, but also Steve Borthwick giving a couple of big interviews in the newspapers this morning saying that a pretty torrid time that he had as a player really informed his philosophy and his approach as a coach. Do you think that that's a worrying distraction from the players, or is it really important to deep down thoughtful fans who's in charge and what these people can really get from the best possible 15 available to them?
Yeah, it is a tough one. I think rugby has always been a sport that's backed their coaches. Recently, it's turned a little bit, and a lot of coaches have been released. There's a big change for Wales, especially this year. It's a World Cup year, so this Six Nation now goes into a World Cup. So it's really important they got continuity for teams. And switching your coach is normally a tough situation. But the unions don't do it lightly, and they think it's right, and they've done it. Wales have brought Gats back, who is he's almost like a god in Wales with his last tenure. So he's come back to fill the gap, lead us into the World Cup. And we all know in Wales what Gats is about. He's massive for us. He's a very simple game plan, and he really gets the boys firing. So it's an exciting time in Wales because see what he can install with us. Again, England, left Eddie Jones go after the autumns. Steve Borthwaite, fantastic coach. He's been fantastic wherever he's gone. So it'd be interesting to see if he can do it on the international stage.
The other thing that intrigues me as an observer, whereas obviously it's your life's work and your experience speaks for itself, is that very often if you're watching an absolutely brilliant game of rugby, and hopefully it will be predominantly settled by tries and conversions, which I find intriguing, but increasingly it's the tedious penalties and availability of points here and there that can completely shift a game and really take it away from the cut and thrust of the main action. Is the maintenance of discipline within the squad as much to do with the captaincy as it is to the coach?
It's a bit of responsibility on both, be fair. It's the coach installs that discipline in the team. If he rates it highly, the boys are going to rate it highly. The captain's on the field. He's your go-to man between the referee and the boys. So, yeah, he should control them. I think, yeah, it's been a lot of penalties and red cards, and especially with the new rule changes and stuff. It's a difficult one. It takes some time to settle down. But the Six Nations, the top tier of rugby tournaments, and that's where you get all your best referees. So hopefully it'll be a good tournament with some great officiating and some spectacular rugby to watch.
Well, I'm allowed to say good luck to everybody having a Welsh maternal grandmother, an English maternal grandfather, and a Scottish paternal grandfather. So good luck to everybody. It is one of the great games, in my humble opinion, and it is certainly one of the great tournaments. Thank you for guiding us through that, Richard Hibberd. Really nice to meet you, and thank you very much indeed for coming on the programme. That, alas, is all that we have time for today, but what a great way to end, though. I really enjoyed talking to Richard there. We will be back as a team, however, tomorrow, and I hope very much indeed until then you enjoy the rest of your day and indeed your evening. See you tomorrow.
Hello, very good day to you. It is going to be quite cloudy with some drizzly rain around, but it's in the northwest where there'll be some more persistent rain for a time. At the moment, if we take a look at the bigger picture, we are in a warm sector in between the warm front towards the east and this cold front towards the northwest, and that warm sector is bringing those cloudy conditions I mentioned earlier. This front, as it gradually pushes its way southeastwards, is bringing some rain. You can see towards lunchtime we're going to have some wet weather across parts of western Scotland and into Northern Ireland too. Elsewhere across the bulk of the UK, yes, it's cloudy, but largely dry with just a few spots of drizzly rain around. Some brightness breaking through the cloud, but this will be quite limited this afternoon. Temperatures are a little bit on the mild side for the time of year, many places getting into double figures, highs perhaps reaching 12, maybe even 13 Celsius towards the south and southeast. Turning colder from the northwest, though, behind this cold front, with some showers feeding in across parts of Scotland, and these are likely to have a bit of a wintry element to them, particularly over the higher ground. Notice as the front pushes its way southwards, it doesn't bring a huge amount of rain to southern parts, with clearer skies then following in behind. Under these clear skies, temperatures are going to take quite a drop tonight, particularly across the north and west.